You've probably heard the word Kafkaesque, right? Maybe you used it after being on hold with customer service for an hour or trying to figure out some impossible form. But what are we really talking about when we use that word? Well, today we're going to dig in and get to the heart of what Kafkaesque truly means. So listen to this. This is the opening line to Franz Kafka's most famous novel, The Trial. Just try to imagine that for a second. You wake up, you know you haven't done a single thing wrong, and suddenly you're arrested. You're thrown into this completely bizarre process where nobody tells you what you're accused of and nobody explains the rules. This right here is your ticket into Kafka's world.
But here's the thing. Being Kafkaesque isn't just about some nightmarish system. We've got to go beyond that simple idea of bureaucracy to find the real, deeply unsettling core of it all.
Now, this is the definition we all kind of know, right? That feeling of being just a tiny cog in some giant impersonal machine. You're stuck navigating this labyrinth of paperwork that seems totally pointless. And yeah, that's a great starting point, but believe me, it is only half the story.
So let's just ask ourselves this. Is standing in a really, really long line the most Kafkaesque thing we can imagine? Or is there something more, something deeper, more human that we're missing?
And this is where it gets really interesting. See, it's not just about the system itself. It's about how we, as people, react to it. This is where we fall into what you could call the tragicomic trap. So, on the one hand, you have this common idea, some poor person getting crushed by a big, faceless system. But the real Kafkaesque twist, it's way more psychological. The person actually gets tangled up in their own circular logic. The trap, you see, is often one they helped build themselves.
And that's exactly why Kafka's stories feel like these strange, modern fables. His characters aren't just helpless victims. It's almost darkly funny, because they often participate in their own undoing, all thanks to their own weird, flawed way of thinking.
All right, let's look at our first case study. This one's a classic. Poseidon, the Greek god of the sea. But Kafka reimagines him as his totally burnt-out middle manager.
So, here's his trap. Poseidon is so buried in paperwork, literally managing the oceans, that he's never actually had a chance to see the oceans. And you might ask, why doesn't he just delegate? Well, he refuses, because he's convinced no one else is smart enough to do the job. The bureaucracy isn't the real prison here. His own ego is the cage.
Okay, next up is probably the most famous Kafka character of all, Gregor Samsa from the Metamorphosis, whose story starts with a very bizarre twist.
So Gregor wakes up one day and he's been transformed into a giant bug. A horrifying, life-shattering event, you'd think. But his first thought isn't, oh my God, I'm an insect. No, it's, oh no, I'm going to be late for my sales job. I mean, his priorities are so ridiculously out of whack that it tells us everything. He was already trapped in a meaningless routine long before he grew a shell.
And for our last case study, let's talk about the strange and honestly kind of sad story of the hunger artist, a man whose entire identity is built on what looks like incredible self-sacrifice.
So this guy is a professional faster. It's his circus act, and he gets furious when his manager makes him stop after 40 days because he thinks it's keeping him from achieving true artistic greatness. But later, when he's finally left alone and is literally starving to death, he whispers a confession. It was all a sham. He didn't fast because he had amazing willpower. He fasted because he could never find a food that he actually liked to eat. His greatest supposed strength was really just a personal failing he disguised his art.
So what does all these self-made prisons tell us about power? Well, it leads us to this really chilling but powerful concept. A tyranny without any tyrant. Let's go back to the trial. That legal system that's chasing Yosef K., it's like this massive machine that's just running on its own terrible momentum. Even the officials working inside it seem totally powerless to stop it. The system isn't about justice. Its only real purpose is to keep itself going, no matter who gets crushed along the way.
The political thinker Hannah Arendt came up with this phrase years after Kafka died, and it just perfectly nails his vision. It's a kind of oppression where there's no single bad guy you can point to. There's no evil king. The system itself is the tyrant.
But we have to remember, as bleak as this all sounds, Kafka's writing is also hilarious. There's this incredibly dark sense of humor in watching a man-sized insect worry about being late for work or a god complain about celestial spreadsheets. The absurdity is both terrifying and somehow really funny.
So why does any of this stuff still matter to us today? Well, because once you know what to look for,
you start seeing the Kafkaesque absolutely everywhere.
Just think about our lives. We're constantly trying to navigate these incredibly complicated systems, online and off. Our words and actions are judged by invisible algorithms or by people we can't see, all according to these strange, unwritten rules that seem to change every day. And these systems have real power over us.
And this is why Kafka is still so powerful. He wasn't just pointing a finger at the absurd world out there. His stories are also like a mirror. They force us to take a hard look at ourselves, at the ways we, through our own egos or our weird priorities, help build our own traps.
In the end, what Kafka really reminds us is that all these absurd systems, they're human creations. And if we made them, that means we also have the power to change them. So the final question isn't just about spotting the absurdity in the world. It's about looking inward and asking, what are the traps we're setting for ourselves? And what can we do to finally break free?